They thought silence was my nature. They mistook my bowed head for surrender, my quiet lips for weakness. They never understood that silence is not absence. It is gathering. A river doesn't roar at its source. It gathers drop by drop until one day it floods everything in its path. I wasn't always the woman people see today. The gray hair, the lined hands, they tell nothing of the girl I once was, or the wars I survived. I was born into a house where words were scarce and hunger plentiful. My father drank away hope. My mother wore her despair like an apron. And I was taught early that asking for more than bread was dangerous. When I was 17, I married Daniel. He was older, taller, his smile bright enough to make me forget the shadows at home. He promised safety. Don't they all? Safety, comfort, a roof that would never leak, food that would never run out. I believed him because belief was all I had. And in those first weeks, I convinced myself I was finally free. But freedom does not come wrapped in locks, and Daniel loved locks. At first it was simple. "Don't go into town without me," he said. "People gossip. You don't need that." Then it grew sharper. He took the key to the front door when he left for work. "So you won't worry yourself thinking about wandering." Later, he began counting the coins after every purchase, studying my handwriting on the market lists, accusing me of mistakes I hadn't made. His voice was soft when he spoke these things, as if each suspicion was just care disguised as chains. And I let him. I told myself obedience was easier than confrontation. I told myself silence kept the peace. Then the first slap came. Not hard, not enough to bruise, but enough to shock the breath from me. He apologized, of course, said he was tired, said I had startled him, said a good wife knows when to hold her tongue. I swallowed the apology like bitter medicine and told myself it was only once. But once is always the seed. The years passed and I became an expert in silence. I could bite down words until they turned to ash. I could smile at neighbors as though my skin didn't burn with hidden marks. I could laugh softly at his jokes while my heart begged me to run, and Daniel grew fat on my obedience. His cruelty sharpened, his voice thundered louder, his hands became less hesitant. Still, I stayed quiet. Why? Because we had children, 3 of them. Mary, our first, sweet, careful, her eyes always lowered, learning too quickly from me. Then Ruth with her stubborn streak, who asked questions that made Daniel's jaw tighten. And lastly, Samuel, my boy, who carried his father's features and, God help me, too much of his father's temper. Daniel told the girls they were to be wives, nothing more. He told Samuel he would be a king, and in that house, he was right. Samuel learned to raise his voice before he could even shave, and the girls learned to shrink smaller with every season. I thought my silence was protecting them, that if I took the brunt of Daniel's rage, the children might be spared. But cruelty is a disease. It seeps into everything. The first time Ruth defied him, refusing to put down a book she'd borrowed, he struck her so hard she fell from her chair. I rushed forward, but Daniel's hand was already raised again, and Samuel, my own son, laughed. That laugh, it split me open. It was the sound of inheritance, the sound of my silence taking root in him, twisting him into something I had once feared and married anyway. That night, Ruth sat beside me on the edge of the bed, her lips split, her eyes burning. "Mama," she whispered, "why don't you ever speak?" I couldn't answer. My throat felt full of stone. She pressed harder. "If you don't, he'll think he can do this forever. He'll think we're nothing." I held her close, her small body shaking in my arms, and all I could say was, "Not yet, not yet," because the truth was, I wasn't ready. I wasn't strong enough. My silence wasn't strategy, it was fear. But something changed in me that night. Something small, a spark I tried to smother. Ruth's eyes haunted me. And for the first time, I began to wonder, what if silence could be sharpened? What if instead of submission, it could be a weapon waiting for its moment? And that was when I began to listen differently. To Daniel's footsteps, heavy with drink. To Samuel's sneers, echoing his father's. To the crack in Ruth's voice when she dared to question. To the way Mary had learned to disappear into the wallpaper. I stored every sound, every insult, every bruise. Because one day I knew they would beg me to speak. And when that day came, my silence would end not as surrender, but as their undoing. Silence became my shadow. It followed me into every corner of that house, into every breath I dared take. Some women wear jewelry, some wear perfume. Me, I wore quiet. Daniel liked it that way. He would boast to neighbors that his wife was well-mannered, not one of those mouthy women who shame their husbands. I would smile faintly, standing half a step behind him, while their wives avoided my eyes. They knew, of course they knew. People always know, but they pretend not to, because the truth is a heavy stone, and no one wants to carry it. Mary learned silence too quickly. She was her father's perfect daughter, gentle, compliant, never looking him directly in the eyes. When he barked her name, she ran. When he ordered, she obeyed. Sometimes, in the still hours of night, I would watch her sleeping face and feel both relief and sorrow. Relief, because perhaps she would survive him. Sorrow, because she had already given up her voice before she'd even found it. Ruth was different. God help me. She was my mirror if I had been braver, if my silence had cracked sooner. She was 12 when she first shouted back at him. 12. He had accused her of wasting flour in the kitchen, and she slammed her hand on the table, her small frame shaking, her voice sharp as glass. "It's not waste. I was baking for Samuel because you said he needed more food. Don't you dare call me careless." The room froze. Even Samuel's grin faltered. Daniel stared at her as if she were some strange animal he'd never seen before. And then he struck her, so hard she hit the floor, her head knocking against the table leg. I ran to her, but Daniel's hand shot out, gripping my arm like a vice. "Stay." His eyes burned into mine. If she wants to act like a grown woman, she can learn like one. Ruth didn't cry. That was what frightened me most. She stood slowly, blood trickling from her temple, and looked him dead in the eye. Then she spat on the floor. Not at him, but close enough. Daniel turned red, but he didn't hit her again, not that night. Instead, he left the house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. When the sound of his boots finally faded, Ruth looked at me, not with fear, but with disappointment. "Why didn't you stop him, Mama?" I wanted to scream. "Because I can't. because he'll kill us if I do, because silence is the only weapon I have left. But the words tangled in my throat. I touched her face gently, wiping the blood, and whispered, "Not yet, not yet, always not yet." Samuel, Samuel, my only son, my heartbreak. I had once dreamed that he would be my salvation, that he would protect his sisters, that he would see his father's cruelty and turn away from it. But Daniel raised him like a second self, feeding him praise for every sneer, rewarding him for every cruel word. By 14, Samuel no longer played with Ruth in the yard. He mocked her instead, calling her stubborn mule or half-brained girl. He mimicked Daniel's tone, Daniel's posture, even the way his father held a belt when angry. The first time I saw Samuel raise his hand at Ruth, my soul cracked. Not because of the blow, though it stung her cheek, but because of his laughter afterward. That laughter was Daniel's echo, a generational curse handed down like an heirloom, and I did nothing. At night, when the house groaned in its sleep, I lay awake, listening to the silence press down on me. My thoughts became a storm I never spoke aloud. What kind of mother was I, saving them from bruises by swallowing my voice, only to let them drown in a sea of his cruelty? Did silence make me strong, or did it make me complicit? I began to notice things differently. How Daniel leaned heavier on drink, how his temper burned shorter each season, how Samuel's cruelty grew bold in public, mocking Mary's quietness, calling Ruth wild in front of neighbors. And the neighbors, they laughed, or worse, they nodded. It was Ruth who lit the fuse in me. One night, after Daniel had fallen asleep in his chair, she came to me with a bruised arm, her eyes blazing. "Mama, if you don't speak, I will. I'll scream so loud the whole town hears. I don't care if he kills me. I won't live like this." Her voice shook the walls of my chest. For a moment, I saw myself at her age, fists clenched, mouth full of words I had swallowed. But unlike me, she hadn't buried her fire. She was carrying it, tending it, waiting for me to see it. That night, I crept to the window. I pulled the curtain back just enough to see the stars. The air outside looked so free, it almost mocked me. My hands trembled as I whispered the words I had been afraid of for decades. Not much longer. Because I knew then, Ruth was right. My silence had preserved us, but it had also imprisoned us, and prisons are not forever. I began to listen in a new way, not just to their cruelty, but to their weakness. Daniel's rants always started after drink, but he was sluggish in the mornings, slow to rise, his memory foggy. Samuel boasted loud, but he was careless, spilling secrets he thought harmless. Mary, though quiet, watched everything. She noticed where Daniel kept his spare keys, where Samuel hid stolen coins. And Ruth had the courage I lacked. I started keeping these pieces in my head, like a puzzle that one day would form a picture of freedom. And for the first time in 40 years, I felt it. Silence was shifting. It was no longer a cage, it was a blade, and when the time came, I would use it. But time is a cruel teacher. It does not let you choose the lesson. It forces it on you. The breaking point came one bitter winter's night. Daniel was drunker than usual, Samuel trailing behind him, swaggering. Mary had been late setting the table. Just late, nothing more. Daniel backhanded her so suddenly the bowl crashed to the floor, broth spilling across the rug. Mary crumpled, stunned, her lip bleeding. She whimpered an apology, but Daniel only roared louder, calling her useless. Samuel laughed again. Ruth stood. Her chair screeched across the floorboards. "Enough," she said, her voice shaking but clear. Daniel's head snapped toward her, fury rising like a storm. "What did you say to me?" Ruth's chin lifted. "I said enough. You won't touch her again." My heart nearly stopped. The room spun. Silence screamed inside me. "Do something, now." But I didn't move. Not when Daniel's fist struck Ruth. Not when Samuel pinned her arms so his father could hit her again. Not even when Ruth screamed my name. I sat frozen, my spoon still in hand, my body trembling. My silence had become habit, and habits are chains heavier than iron. Later that night, after the storm had passed and Ruth lay bruised and broken on the bed, she turned to me with eyes hollow and furious. "You'll never speak, will you, Mama?" she whispered. "You'll wait until he kills us all." Her words sliced deeper than any blow Daniel had ever given me. I didn't answer, couldn't. But inside, something shifted, because I realized she was wrong. I would speak, but not yet, not in anger, not in desperation. I would speak when the world itself grew quiet enough to hear me. I would speak when silence was no longer weakness, but judgment. And when that day came, Daniel, Samuel, perhaps even the neighbors, would beg for mercy. The winter passed, leaving scars on more than just the land. Ruth's cheekbone never quite healed straight, and Mary, my sweet Mary, learned to flinch at the sound of boots on the floorboards. Samuel grew taller, broader. His swagger sharpened into arrogance. Daniel fed it with praise, calling him a man already, as if cruelty was a crown to be worn proudly. I moved through those months like a shadow, cooking, cleaning, patching wounds in secret, hiding tears where no one could see. But inside, the silence I carried was changing shape. It was no longer soft. It had edges now, sharp edges. I began to keep track, not just of insults or blows, but of moments, patterns. Daniel's rages were worst on Fridays, after the tavern, when the mill wages weighed in his pocket. Samuel strutted most in the evenings when he thought his father was watching. Mary whispered to herself while she worked, prayers perhaps, though I couldn't hear the words. And Ruth, she watched, always watched, eyes like flint, storing every injustice, every movement, every weakness. It was Ruth who first whispered of leaving. "Mama, we could run," she said one night, her voice barely louder than the wind outside. "We could take the train, disappear. He'd never find us." My heart leapt at the thought. I saw us, Mary, Ruth, and me, walking away into a life that wasn't built on bruises and fear. But then Samuel's laugh echoed down the hall, and reality returned like a chain tightening around my throat. "Not yet," I whispered, brushing her hair back. She groaned in frustration. "Always not yet. When, Mama? When will enough be enough?" I had no answer, only the steady pounding of my heart, louder than it had been in years. Spring came, but it brought no renewal. If anything, Daniel grew meaner. The mill cut hours, Money grew tighter, and his pride shrank smaller than his fists. Samuel, eager to prove himself, began to treat the house as if it already belonged to him. He barked orders at Mary, shoved Ruth aside, mocked me openly. Daniel laughed at it, proud that his son had inherited his strength. Strength, that was what they called it. But I saw what it truly was: weakness dressed in violence. One night in May, the turning came. Mary had been sewing in the corner, quiet as always. Her stitches were neat, her head bowed. Samuel strutted in, waving a coin he had stolen from Daniel's coat. "Look, Mama," he sneered, "I earn better than you ever could. Maybe I should start charging rent for you and your daughters." Mary didn't look up. She just kept sewing. Perhaps that was her mistake. Samuel snatched the fabric from her lap, yanking it so hard the needle pricked her finger. She gasped, blood staining the cloth. "Answer me when I speak," he growled, his father's shadow in his eyes. Something inside me cracked wide open. I stood, my chair scraping against the floor. Enough! The word hung in the air, sharp and strange on my tongue. It had been years, decades, since I had spoken against them. My voice sounded foreign even to me. Samuel blinked, startled. Daniel looked up from his chair, his expression unreadable. "Put it back," I said, my tone steady. "Give her the cloth." For a moment, silence reigned. Then Samuel smirked. "Or what, old woman?" The room spun. My hands trembled, but I did not lower my gaze. "Or you'll regret it," he laughed, tossing the fabric to the floor. "Regret it? You? You can't even look father in the eye without shaking." Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "She's lost her wits. Don't mind her, boy. She'll quiet down again." The heat in my chest almost consumed me. I wanted to scream, to strike, to tear the smugness from both their faces. But instead, I lowered my head, just slightly. Silence again. They thought I had retreated. They thought my little rebellion had passed. But Ruth's eyes met mine across the table, and in her gaze I saw it. She knew. She knew my silence was different now. Not surrender, preparation. That night, while Daniel and Samuel slept heavy from drink, Ruth came to me. "Mama," she whispered, "I saw it. You're planning something, aren't you?" I didn't answer. My fingers traced the edge of the wooden table, worn smooth by years of servitude. "You are," she pressed. "Tell me." At last I looked at her, my brave daughter, bruised but unbroken, staring at me as if I were more than the woman she'd always pitied. "Yes," I said quietly, "but we must be patient. Timing matters." Her lips curled into the faintest smile, not joy, but recognition. "Then I'll wait with you." And just like that, the silence in the house shifted again. It was no longer mine alone. Ruth carried it with me, 2 blades sharpening side by side. The days grew longer, but the nights heavier. Daniel's temper worsened, Samuel strutted bolder, and Mary shrank smaller into herself. Yet beneath it all, Ruth and I began to build something invisible. We shared glances, subtle nods, silent promises. I noticed weaknesses no one else did. Daniel's left leg dragged slightly after long days at the mill. Samuel's bravado cracked when confronted by men stronger than him. His courage existed only where we were weaker. I gathered these details the way a spider gathers threads. Piece by piece, weaving something they could not see, until it was too late, because one day I knew my silence would shatter, and when it did, the sound would echo louder than their fists ever had. The summer came heavy that year, hotter than I could remember. The air hung thick in the house, sticky with sweat and anger. Windows stayed shut because Daniel said open air was wasteful, though I knew the real reason. He didn't want the neighbors to hear. Heat makes tempers short, and Daniel's temper was already a blade sharpened thin. One evening, after a day when the mill had turned him away for lack of work, he returned home boiling with fury. Samuel trailed behind him, swaggering like a prince at court, already drunk on his father's approval. Ruth and Mary were setting the table, their movements careful, measured, the way prey moves when it senses a predator nearby. The stew wasn't ready fast enough. That was all it took. Daniel's hand lashed out, knocking the pot to the floor, broth spilling across the boards. Mary gasped, scrambling to clean it, but his boot caught her side, sending her sprawling. "Useless," he growled. "Both of you. A house full of mouths and not one worth keeping." I stood frozen, the ladle still in my hand, my heart pounding like a drum, the sight of Mary clutching her ribs, Ruth's face taut with rage, Samuel's smirk curling at the edges. It was too much. I wanted to scream, to hurl the ladle, to claw at his face, to tear down the walls that had held me captive for decades. But my silence held, iron tight. Not yet, because silence is strongest when it arrives at the moment no one expects. That night, after the house had settled into uneasy sleep, Ruth slipped into my room. The moonlight caught the bruise darkening her sister's side. She didn't cry. Ruth rarely cried anymore. She burned instead. "Mama," she whispered, her voice steady. "He'll kill us if we stay. You know it." I nodded. My throat ached with words I hadn't spoken aloud. "I know." "Then when?" she pressed. Her hands were fists at her sides. "When will we stop waiting?" I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floorboards worn thin beneath my feet. For years I had told myself silence kept us alive. But I saw it now. Silence was killing us too, slow and invisible. "When the moment comes," I said at last. "Not before, not in rage, not in fear. When the moment comes, Ruth, he'll never see it coming." Her eyes locked on mine, fierce and unyielding. "I'll be ready." And I believed her. From then on, Ruth and I moved as conspirators, quietly, carefully. We didn't need words. Our silence spoke enough. I began to collect. Small things, insignificant to Daniel and Samuel, but precious to me. Scraps of cloth hidden under the mattress. A rusty key I found behind the shed, bent and useless, but worth keeping. Coins slipped unnoticed from Daniel's pockets while he slept. Even bits of kindling gathered and tucked away. Each piece was nothing on its own, but together they were building blocks, insurance, tools for a day not yet spoken of. Mary noticed, though she never said much. One night she whispered, "Mama, I see what you're doing." Fear trembled in her voice. She wasn't like Ruth. She didn't carry fire. She carried caution, survival. But even she understood something was shifting. "I'm scared," she admitted softly. I stroked her hair the way I had when she was a child. "So am I whispered. But fear isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's the thing that keeps you careful. Her tears dampened my shoulder, but I held her steady as stone. The breaking point came in late August. Samuel had been drinking, full of himself, swaggering bigger than ever. Ruth had ignored him at supper, refusing to rise to his taunts. That enraged him more than if she'd shouted back. He reached across the table, seizing her wrist, twisting until she gasped. "Don't you look away from me," he snarled. Before I could move, before I could even breathe, Daniel slapped the table so hard the plates rattled. "Teach her, boy, teach her what respect means." The words froze me. Samuel's grip tightened. Ruth's face pale with pain, but her eyes blazing. Mary whimpered, her hands pressed to her mouth. And I stood. Something inside me surged, a river bursting its dam. "Let her go." The words rang louder than I expected, steady and sharp. The room fell silent. Samuel stared at me, stunned, his grip loosening slightly. Daniel turned, his face darkening. "What did you say?" I said, "Let her go." My voice didn't waver this time. It rang like steel. The silence after was thick, suffocating. Then Daniel rose, slowly, deliberately. His chair scraped back against the floor. He stepped toward me, his shadow stretching across the boards. "You've forgotten your place, Clara." I stood tall, or as tall as my body allowed after years of bowing. My hands shook, but I didn't lower my gaze. No. I've remembered it, and it's not where you think. His face twisted with fury. He struck me, hard, his palm cracking against my cheek. My head snapped sideways, the taste of blood filling my mouth. But I didn't fall. I straightened, wiped my lip, and smiled, just faintly, enough for him to see. That smile unsettled him. I saw it. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. I didn't speak again. I let silence answer for me. And that silence, it was louder than any scream. That night, after the house sank into uneasy slumber, Ruth sat by me, clutching my hand. "Mama," she whispered, "I saw it. You frightened him." I nodded, my cheek throbbing, my lip split. "Yes," I whispered. He felt it, the end beginning. She squeezed my hand tight. "Then promise me we won't wait forever." And in that moment, I promised. Not with words, but with silence sharpened into resolve. The waiting was nearly done, because I had seen it in his eyes. Fear, just a flicker, but real. And once a man like Daniel feels fear, it grows like rot. He would strike harder, demand more, rage louder. He would try to crush me back into silence. But the truth was, he had already lost, because silence had become my weapon, and soon I would wield it. After that night, the slap, the smile, the silence that rattled him, everything changed. Not on the surface, no. The days still moved in their weary rhythm. Daniel raging, Samuel mocking, Mary shrinking, Ruth burning. But beneath it all, something had shifted. He knew it. I knew it. Daniel began watching me closer, noticing the smallest movements, the way I lingered at the window, the way I held Mary's hand longer than usual, the way Ruth and I shared glances across the table. His suspicion grew like a storm cloud, heavy and dark. He tried harder to crush me back into the mold he had carved. His words sharper, his hands quicker. He demanded obedience with a desperation that almost made me laugh. For years he believed he was unbreakable, untouchable. Now he sensed the crack, and it frightened him. Samuel noticed too, though in his own twisted way. He strutted more, mocked louder, as if to prove he was the stronger heir. "Don't think you can scare Father," he sneered once when Ruth defied him. "We'll put you in your place." The word was a dagger in my chest, my son and my jailer united by cruelty. Mary wilted under the tension. She stayed quiet, eyes down, her body thin and trembling like a candle in wind. I worried for her most. She had learned my silence, but not my fire. She didn't have Ruth's defiance. She was fading, and that, I realized, was why I could wait no longer. Silence had carried me far. It had sharpened into something dangerous. But a blade unused rusts, and mine was ready. The night it began, the air was heavy with heat, thick enough to choke. Daniel had gone to the tavern, Samuel with him, leaving the house unusually still. Mary sewed in the corner, Ruth paced near the window. When the door slammed open, both men stumbled in, stinking of whiskey. Daniel's face was red, his shirt stained with sweat. Samuel's grin was wide, cruel. "Where's my supper?" Daniel barked, his voice already raised. "It's on the stove," I said calmly. My voice carried no tremor this time. That unsettled him. I saw his eyes narrow. He sat thumping his fist on the table. "Hurry, woman." I moved slowly, deliberately. My silence pressed heavy in the room. Even Samuel glanced between us, sensing something he couldn't name. Ruth's jaw was tight. Mary's hands trembled on her needle. As I ladled the stew, Daniel muttered, "Don't forget yourself, Clara. You belong here, to me, always." I placed the bowl before him, my hands steady, and met his gaze. "We'll see." His spoon clattered against the bowl. He froze. Samuel frowned. "What did she say, Father?" Daniel's face reddened. He lunged to his feet, grabbing my wrist. His grip was iron, his breath sour. "Say it again." I leaned closer, my voice low, steady. "We'll see who belongs to whom." For a moment, just a breath, he faltered. His grip tightened, then loosened. He shoved me back instead of striking. "You've gone mad." But I saw it. In his eyes, fear. That night, Ruth crept to my side again. "Mama," she whispered, "what are you doing?" I took her hands in mine. They were small but strong, calloused by work. "I'm letting him feel it, bit by bit, the silence turning." Her brow furrowed. "You're scaring him." "Yes," I said simply, "and fear is the beginning of mercy." Her eyes widened. "Mercy?" I nodded. "One day, Ruth, he will beg for it, and when he does, I will decide what he deserves." Her lips parted, but she said nothing. For once, even she was struck silent. The days that followed were different. Daniel barked less, though his eyes followed me like a hawk. Samuel grew restless, his jests sharper, his temper shorter. Mary whispered more prayers, and Ruth watched me with a mixture of awe and terror. Because I had changed, they felt it. My silence was no longer the silence of obedience. It was the silence of a storm gathering, the silence before thunder. The turn came one evening when Samuel, drunk and bold, cornered Ruth in the hall. I heard her cry out, sharp and furious. By the time I reached them, His hand was gripping her arm too tight, his grin mocking. "You'll learn," he sneered. "You'll bow just like her." Her eyes blazed. "Never." Before he could strike, I stepped between them. My body was small, my bones brittle, but my silence was iron. "Let her go." He laughed. "Or what?" I said nothing, only stared. My gaze locked on his, my lips sealed. The silence pressed against him, harder than words. His grin faltered, his grip loosened. Finally, he shoved Ruth away and stormed off, muttering curses. Ruth's chest heaved, her eyes wide. "Mama, you didn't even say anything." I touched her cheek gently. Sometimes silence screams louder than words. She trembled, not with fear this time, but with realization. That night, as I lay awake, I understood. The time was close. For decades, they thought my silence meant weakness, but silence had become my weapon, and soon it would be my victory. Because when Daniel and Samuel finally realized what it meant, when they understood the power I had been holding back all those years, then they would beg, and when they begged, I would decide whether to grant mercy or deny it. By autumn, the house itself seemed to sense the shift. The walls, once suffocating, now felt like they held their breath with me. Even the floorboards creaked differently, as if waiting for something to finally break. Daniel grew restless, his control slipping like sand through his fists. He drank more, shouted louder, struck harder, but the cracks only widened. Every time he barked, I did not flinch the way I once had. Every time his hand rose, I steadied myself and let my silence answer, and that silence unnerved him more than screams ever could. One night, he staggered into the kitchen, fury in his eyes. "You think you're better than me now?" he spat. "You think your silence scares me?" I met his gaze, my hands steady as I kneaded bread. I didn't speak, didn't blink. He slammed his fist against the wall so hard the plaster cracked. "Say something! Damn you! Speak!" I only pressed the dough harder beneath my palms. The silence wrapped around him like chains. He cursed, shoved the table, stormed from the room. But I saw the truth in his retreat. For the first time in our lives together, he was the one who could not bear the quiet. Samuel fared no better. His swagger faltered each time he caught my gaze. He still mocked, still strutted, but there was hesitation now. Once, when he grabbed Ruth's braid and yanked it cruelly, I simply turned toward him, said nothing, stared until he flushed and let her go. He muttered something under his breath and stomped off, but Ruth's eyes glowed like embers. Later, she whispered, "Mama, you didn't even move." And he stopped. I nodded. Because silence is heavier than fists. He doesn't know how to carry it. Her hand gripped mine, trembling not with fear but with dawning power. But Daniel was no fool. He felt the shift, even if he couldn't name it. His paranoia grew wild. He began locking away coins, hiding keys in different places, accusing me of theft when his memory failed. One evening, he dragged me by the arm into the parlor, Samuel looming at his side. "Tell me, Clara," he hissed, "are you plotting against me? Are you teaching the girls to defy me?" I looked at him, blood rushing in my ears, my arm throbbing under his grip. And I smiled, not wide, not mocking, just a thin curve of my lips, enough for him to see. His hand tightened, then shook. His eyes flickered with something I had never seen before, fear. "You'll regret that smile," he growled. But he let me go. That was when I knew the time was almost here. I began to prepare openly, no longer scraps hidden in shadows, but movements bold enough to be noticed. I hummed while I worked, an old hymn Daniel despised. I lingered by the window, curtain drawn back, letting neighbors see my face. I touched Mary's hair at supper, comfort in front of his eyes. Each act was small, but each was defiance. Each told him, "You are losing me. You are losing us." Mary whispered to me in fear, "Mama, you're provoking him." "Yes," I answered softly, "I am." Her eyes widened. "But why?" "Because sometimes," I said, "you must push a man like Daniel to the edge before he learns where the drop truly is." The moment came sooner than I expected. A storm rolled in late one night, rain slashing against the windows, thunder cracking like God himself was breaking the sky. Daniel had been drinking heavier than usual, Samuel with him. The two of them stumbled in, soaked and snarling, fury spilling from every word. The stew wasn't hot enough. The floor wasn't swept. Mary's stitching was crooked. Every excuse became a weapon. At last, Daniel turned on Ruth. "You think you're better than me?" he snarled, advancing, his hand raised. "I'll teach you your place." Ruth's eyes blazed, but she braced herself for the blow. And then I moved. I stepped between them, my body frail, but my silence impenetrable. His hand froze midair. For a heartbeat, the whole room held still. The storm outside, the fire inside, even Samuel's smirk fading. I raised my chin, looked him dead in the eye, and I spoke. No more, 2 words, quiet, steady, unshaken. The silence after was deafening. Even the thunder seemed to pause. Daniel's arm trembled, caught between rage and hesitation. Samuel's mouth opened, then closed. Mary gasped. Ruth's eyes filled with something fierce, something unspoken. I stepped closer, my voice low, but sharp enough to cut through bone. "You will not touch her. You will not touch any of us again." He stared, stunned. And then he laughed, a brittle, hollow sound. "You think you can stop me, old woman?" His laughter cracked into a roar. "I'll break you all." But even as he shouted, even as his spit flew, I saw it. His eyes darting, his hand unsteady, his chest heaving. The storm inside him was not strength anymore. It was fear. Because he realized in that moment what I had known for months. My silence was gone, and without it, he had no power left. That night, as the storm raged on, Ruth whispered to me in the dark, "Mama, what happens now?" I held her hand, my voice steady. "Now we end it." Her breath caught. "How?" "Not with running, not with hiding, with truth, with silence broken." And in the quiet of that storm, I made the vow that had been building in me for decades. They would beg for mercy, and when they did, I would decide whether mercy still lived in me. The next day felt different, though nothing had changed on the surface. The storm had passed, the air smelled of wet earth, and Daniel left early for the mill. Samuel swaggered after him, pretending at responsibility. Mary stitched by the window. Ruth chopped vegetables with sharper strokes than the knife required. But the house itself was holding its breath. I could feel it, the waiting. All those years of silence, years of bruises hidden under sleeves, years of swallowing words until they curdled in my chest. They were gathering now, pressing against the walls. The vow I made in the storm would not leave me. It echoed with every step I took, every sound of my daughter's breath, every remembered bruise on their skin. They will beg for mercy. The breaking came sooner than I thought. That evening, Daniel stumbled in late, his boots mud-stained, his eyes red with drink. Samuel followed, not quite as drunk, but eager to mirror his father's swagger. They were loud before they even entered, their voices rising through the rain-soaked night. Mary stiffened at the sound, her stitches faltering. Ruth set the knife down slowly, her shoulders tense. When the door slammed open, the air in the room thickened. Daniel's gaze swept over us, suspicion already burning. Quiet, as always, he muttered, plotting, no doubt, whispering when my back's turned. Ruth straightened, fire flashing in her eyes. We don't need to whisper. My heart lurched. Too soon, too bold. Daniel's face darkened. He lurched toward her, hand rising. You insolent... But I stepped forward, placing myself between them once again. My voice was calm, level, steady. Touch her, and you'll answer to me. He froze, eyes narrowing. You? His laugh was bitter, sharp. You're nothing, Clara. You've always been nothing. My silence was answer enough. And then Samuel, my own blood, my betrayal, stepped forward. Father's right, he sneered. You've lost your mind, old woman. Maybe it's time we reminded you where you belong. He reached for me, and that was the moment. The moment I had carried for decades, waiting in the shadows of my own silence. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I seized the knife Ruth had set down, the blade still wet with onion juice, and held it firm in my hand. The room stopped. Daniel's eyes widened. Samuel's smirk faltered. Even Ruth's breath caught. Mary let out the smallest gasp. You will not touch me again, I said softly. Not her, not any of us. The knife gleamed in the lamplight, but it wasn't the blade that shook them. It was my voice. After 40 years, it was no longer a whisper, no longer a plea. It was judgment. Daniel stepped back just half a step, but enough. His chest heaved. For the first time, the king of this house looked like a man staring at the end of his rule. You wouldn't dare, he hissed. I tilted my head, my eyes steady on his. Try me. The silence that followed was unbearable. Samuel shifted, uncertain, his bravado crumbling. Daniel's face twisted with fury, but beneath it, I saw it again, the flicker of fear. He opened his mouth, perhaps to curse, perhaps to strike, but the words caught in his throat. And in that moment, I understood. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to strike first. My silence, sharpened by years of suffering, was the weapon. Every second I refused to bow, refused to beg, the more they unraveled. Daniel's hands shook. Samuel's jaw clenched. And then Daniel did something I never thought I'd see. He whispered, Clara, stop. My name, soft, trembling. The first crack in his armor. The man who had silenced me for 40 years. asking me to stop. I almost laughed. Stop? I echoed. Now you want silence? Now you want me to hush? His face drained of color. Please. The word fell from his lips like ash. Please. The sound filled me with a strength I had never known. Behind me, Ruth let out a choked gasp. Mary dropped her needle. Even Samuel staggered back, eyes wide. Because they all felt it too, the balance had shifted. Daniel, the tyrant, the jailer, the monster of my youth, was begging, and I wasn't finished. I stepped closer, the knife steady in my hand, my silence wrapping around us all like a noose. Mercy, I whispered, tasting the word like poison and honey. Now you beg for mercy. He nodded, his body trembling. Yes. I let the silence stretch, thick and suffocating, until he could barely breathe. Then I leaned closer, close enough for him to see every scar he had carved into my face. Mercy, I repeated. Tell me, Daniel, did you ever show it? His lips parted, but no words came, and in that emptiness, that choking silence, I saw the truth. He was already broken. That night, when the house finally quieted, Ruth sat beside me, her voice hushed with awe. Mama, he begged you. I nodded, my fingers still curled tight around the knife. Yes, I whispered, and tomorrow he will beg again. Because I wasn't finished. Not yet. My silence had ended. Now it was their turn to learn what silence could do. The next morning dawned gray, heavy with mist. The air in the house was different, thick, brittle, as if every wall remembered what had been spoken the night before. Daniel did not shout at breakfast. He did not demand, did not strike. He sat quiet, his spoon clinking softly against the bowl. Samuel, too, kept his eyes low, his smirk gone, his jaw tight. Mary glanced between them nervously, while Ruth watched with the sharp focus of a hawk. They were waiting for me, and I let them. I let the silence stretch, a rope tightening with every tick of the clock. I moved with calm precision, pouring tea, clearing plates, folding cloth. My hands steady, my face serene. The silence wasn't obedience anymore. It was rain. By midday, Daniel snapped. What are you planning, Clara? His voice cracked, brittle as glass. I looked at him, long and steady, before answering. Nothing you haven't earned? His face blanched, his lips trembling as though he wanted to roar, but couldn't find the breath. He rose, fists clenched, but froze when I set the knife from the breadboard down slowly on the table between us. Not as a threat, just as a reminder. The silence swelled, pressing him back into his chair. You'll pay for this, he muttered, but the words rang hollow. Even Samuel flinched at the weakness in them. Ruth leaned forward, her voice low, sharp. No, Father, you will. The final breaking came that evening. The neighbors had gathered outside, called by the sound of shouting. Daniel's voice, frantic, desperate. He had stormed into the yard, roaring at me, at the girls, at the air itself. She's lost her mind, he bellowed. She's turning them against me. You all see it, my own family conspiring. Faces appeared at the fence line, curious, whispering. For years they had suspected, but none had dared to look too closely. Now Daniel himself had dragged them to witness. And I was ready. I stepped outside, my daughters behind me. My dress plain, my hair gray, my face lined with decades of silence. but my eyes steady and unflinching. The yard grew still. The neighbors held their breath. Daniel turned on me, sweat glistening on his brow. "Speak," he shouted. "Tell them I'm right." I did, but not the way he wanted. 40 years, I said, my voice clear, carrying over the fence, over the whispers, over every bruise etched into my memory. 40 years of silence, 40 years of fists and chains and locks. He thought I would never speak. He thought silence was weakness. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Daniel's face drained of color. I stepped closer, my words sharp as steel. But silence remembers, it gathers, and now it is your judgment. Daniel's knees buckled, right there before the neighbors, before his son, before the daughters he had broken and underestimated. He dropped. "Please," he rasped, voice cracking. "Clara, mercy." The sound was everything I had carried in my chest for decades. The plea I had dreamed of hearing, and still I let the silence hang heavy until even the neighbors shifted uneasily, until Daniel wept into the dirt. Finally, I spoke soft and steady. "Mercy is not mine to give you. You threw it away, blow by blow, word by word. Now you'll beg, not from me, but from the silence itself, and it will never answer." His sobs filled the yard. Samuel stood stiff, pale, his lips pressed tight, realizing for the first time his inheritance was nothing but ruin. Ruth stood taller than I had ever seen her, her chin lifted, her fire blazing. Mary clutched my arm, trembling, but she was smiling, and me, I turned to the crowd. "You've seen it now," I said, "the truth. Let silence tell the rest." Not one neighbor spoke, not one dared, because the silence I carried had spread, swallowing them all. That night I sat by the window, the house quiet at last. Daniel's sobs had faded into pitiful mutters. Samuel stayed in his room, door shut, his pride cracked beyond repair. My daughters slept on either side of me, breathing soft, free. I looked out at the dark sky, at the stars glimmering like wounds that had finally healed. They thought I'd stay silent. They thought silence meant surrender. But silence was waiting, gathering, sharpening, and when it finally spoke, it was louder than all their violence, stronger than all their chains. Now they know, now they beg, and I am finally free.